Welcome to Fun Facts Online. Today we are digging deep into the frozen soil of history to uncover a story that isn't about empires or wars, but about a relationship that changed the very nature of humanity. We are going to talk about the moment we decided to invite the wild into our homes. We are talking about the origin of the dog. Our journey begins in the cold, waterlogged earth of northwestern Russia. Beneath layers of peat that have accumulated over thousands of years, archaeologists found something profound at a place called the Veritai site. It wasn't gold or weapons, it was a skull, specifically a canine skull, crushed by time, but unmistakably different from the wolves that had prowled the Ice Age. This fossil, dated to approximately 11,000 years ago, is the starting point for understanding how the wolf became the dog. It represents a time when the glaciers were retreating, the world was waking up from the long sleep of the Ice Age, and humanity was making a choice that would alter the trajectory of life on Earth. To really understand the weight of this discovery, we have to look at the biology. To an untrained eye, a wolf skull and a dog skull look nearly identical. After all, they share 99.9% of their DNA. But to a paleoanthropologist, they are worlds apart. Researchers use a technique called geometric morphometrics to distinguish them. Instead of just measuring length and width with calipers, they map the skull in 3D space, analyzing dozens of specific anatomical landmarks. When they applied this to the 11,000-year-old Veritai skulls, a distinct pattern emerged. These were not just small wolves, they were biologically reshaped. The most obvious change was rostral shortening, the long, powerful snout of the wolf, which was designed to bring down massive prey like elk and bison, had retracted in these dogs. This shortening actually caused crowding in the teeth, a trait common in domestic dogs but rare in the wild. Then, there was the brain case. While dog brains eventually shrank compared to wolves, in what we call domestication syndrome, these early dogs showed a widening of the cranium. Perhaps most interestingly, the angle of their eye sockets shifted. Wolves have eyes angled to the side for scanning the horizon. These ancient dogs had eyes oriented more forward. This facilitates binocular vision, but more importantly, it facilitates eye contact with humans. It suggests an animal designed not just to see the world, but to look at us. Why did these bones change? The prevailing theory is that these physical changes are byproducts of selecting for tameness. When humans, or the dogs themselves, selected for animals that were less aggressive and less fearful, they were inadvertently selecting for retained juvenile traits. This process is called pedomorphism. Essentially, a puppy has a shorter snout and a wider head than an adult wolf. By selecting for eternal puppies in terms of behavior, we created animals that looked like eternal puppies in terms of bone structure. The Veritai skulls are the smoking gun of this process, proving that by 11,000 years ago, dogs were a genetically and morphologically distinct population. But the story of dog domestication isn't a straight line. It is a tangled web of false starts. Before we get to these definitive dogs of the Mesolithic, we have to address the controversy of the proto-dogs. In the 1860s, a skull was found in Goyet Cave in Belgium, dating back nearly 32,000 years. More recently, a similar skull was found in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, dated to 33,000 years ago. These skulls were robust, but had shorter snouts than wolves. For a long time, researchers thought these were the first dogs, living with mammoth hunters deep in the Ice Age. However, the comprehensive study of the 11,000-year-old skulls has cast doubt on this. When the data from the Veritai dogs was compared to these 30,000-year-old specimens, there was a clear distinction. The Veritai dogs clustered together as a distinct group. The older skulls fell into a gray area, not quite wolf, but not quite dog. The consensus now is that these ancient creatures were likely incipient dogs, or unique wolf ecomorphs. They may have been wolves that started down the path of domestication, scavenging from Paleolithic hunters, but they were evolutionary dead ends. When the last glacial maximum hit around 26,000 years ago, the ice sheets expanded and resources vanished. In that harsh crucible, those early experiments in friendship likely failed. The lineage that would become our pets didn't truly establish itself until the ice began to melt. This brings us back to the Veritai culture in the Russian forest around 9000 BC. This was a society of complex hunter-gatherer fishers. They were semi-sedentary, building wooden dwellings and using sophisticated tools made of bone and antler. In this water-rich, forest-dense environment, dogs were essential survival tools. The skulls found here show a population of dogs that were already highly specialized. They weren't just generic village dogs. They showed variation in size and shape. This suggests that even 11,000 years ago, humans might have been unconsciously selecting dogs for different roles. A smaller dog might be better for fitting in a canoe or flushing birds. A larger dog might be needed for protection against bears or hauling sleds. These people didn't have pugs and St. Bernards. but they had dogs that were adapting to the specific ecological niche of the Russian forest. While the Verity dogs were navigating the taiga, a completely different drama was unfolding thousands of miles to the south in the arid landscapes of Jordan. At a site called Shubayqa 6, we find evidence of why humans might have finalized this domestication pact. Around 11,500 years ago, the climate took a sharp turn. The world had been warming, but then it snapped back into a near-glacial state known as the Younger Dryas. The Levant, which had been lush, became dry and cold. The large game animals became scarce. The Natufian people living there had to adapt. They shifted their diet in what is called the broad-spectrum revolution, targeting smaller, faster prey like hares. Now, catching a gazelle requires stealth. Catching a hare requires speed and agility, traits that humans lack but wolves possess. At Shubayqa 6, archaeologists noticed a spike in hare bones. But these weren't just any bones. Many had been digested. They were pitted by stomach acid but were too large to have been swallowed by humans. They had been eaten by dogs. This paints a vivid picture. The people were living with dogs that roamed the settlement and scavenged waste. But the explosion in hare hunting suggests these dogs were partners. A hunter would set out into the scrubland, unable to outrun a hare, but his dogs could. They would flush the prey, or run it down. In exchange, the dogs got the offal and the safety of the campfire. The dog was effectively a new technology for small game hunting, forged in the necessity of a changing climate. This global phenomenon wasn't limited to Eurasia, it tracked the migration of humans into the New World. At the coaster site in the Illinois River Valley, archaeologists found the skeletons of 4 dogs buried in shallow pits, dating back about 10,000 years. These were small to medium-sized animals, compact and agile. The presence of these dogs implies that their ancestors must have crossed the Bering Land Bridge with the first human migrants thousands of years earlier. There were no wolves in North America that could have been domesticated into these forms. The genetic lineage points back to Eurasia. This means when the first Paleo-Indians trekked across the frozen wastes of Beringia, facing ice walls and megafauna, they didn't do it alone. They had dogs serving as sentries and pack animals. They were the biological engine of the migration. Genetic science has recently revolutionized this timeline even further. A landmark study revealed a stunning fact. By 11,000 years ago, there were already at least 5 distinct genetic lineages of dogs in the world. There was the Neolithic Levantine lineage in the Middle East, the Mesolithic Karelian lineage in Russia, the Baikalian lineage in Siberia, the ancient American lineage, and the lineage that would become the dingoes of Oceania. For 5 distinct lineages to exist 11,000 years ago, the common ancestor of all dogs must have lived much earlier, perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. This confirms a single domestication event from a wolf population that is now extinct. Modern wolves are not the ancestors of dogs, they are cousins. The true dog-father wolf is a ghost lineage that vanished, living on only in the DNA of our pets. Finally, we have to look past the biology and the hunting strategies to the emotional bond. Did these ancient people love their dogs? The archaeological record says yes. At the Natufian site of Ain Malaha in Israel, dating back 12,000 years, archaeologists found a tomb containing an elderly woman. Her hand was resting gently on the body of a small puppy curled up beside her head. A puppy is useless for hunting. It is a burden, yet she was buried with it, granting it the same rights as a human. In Germany, at the Bonn Oberkassel site, dating back 14,000 years, a grave contained a dog that had suffered from distemper as a puppy. It would have been sick and incapacitated for weeks. It should have died. But it survived to adulthood because humans nursed it. They brought it water and kept it warm when it was useless to them. They cared for it, not for what it could do, but for what it was. At the coaster site in Illinois, dogs were laid on their sides in sleeping poses, in graves dug specifically for them within the human cemetery. They weren't discarded in trash middens like deer bones. They were laid to rest. This is the archaeological line between livestock and kin. So, where's the very first dog? Why can't we find the missing link? The answer lies in the slow nature of evolution. For the first few thousand years, the proto-dogs would have looked exactly like wolves. Their bones would be indistinguishable. It was only after they became reproductively isolated that their morphology shifted. The 11,000-year-old skulls from Verity and Shubayqa are the founding documents of this new era. They mark the moment we sealed the pact. We gave them fire and food. They gave us their speed, senses, and loyalty. When you look at a modern dog, you are looking at the legacy of Mesolithic pioneers. The story of these skulls is really the story of us, how we learned to trust the other, and how we decided not to walk the path of history alone. That is the incredible true story of the 11,000-year-old dog. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.